Hello, my name is Tom and welcome to my channel, Integral Views. Today I want to take a look into the Fabian Society, which has close links to the Labour Party that is in power in the UK, to understand their ideology. So I am a bit sick at the moment, to be honest, and in my haze of sickness and illness, I went and looked into the Fabian Society. I read 500 pages of their published documents, making notes in preparation for this video. And I did this because I wanted to get an understanding of their ideology, who they are and what they believe. Because I think it's really important to know, why a lot of the things that are happening in the UK are happening and where they're coming from. So that's what we're going to do today. A bit of a deep dive into the Fabian Society, looking at some of their documents and trying to pick out some of the kind of ideological threads that lead through all of it that might be giving rise to a lot of the things that are happening in the UK via the Labour Party who are in government. Okay, let's get on with that then. Before we look in detail at some of the Fabian Society policy documents, and we won't go too much into detail, don't worry, I've done that and I don't recommend it to anybody. But yeah, so I've delved into this rabbit hole of Fabian Society ideology, and I've come out of that with some little bits and pieces that we can look at and hopefully understand, help us to understand the ideology a bit better. But first of all, why is this important? So the Labour Party took office in, I think it was July 2024, might have been June, but it was around that time. So they took office and they've been in charge ever since. Basically, almost a month, I think around a month after they took office, they plummeted in the polls and they've been deeply unpopular ever since. So this next graph shows the current disapproval rating for the Labour Party, which stands at 70% in the UK. And the approval rating for our government at the moment, the Labour Party, is at 11%, which is historically low. So these are basically very disastrous approval ratings for the government, right? And we will most certainly, through looking at some of these published Fabian Society documents, understand why that happened. I found a very, very good example of why that happened. What caused them to go into office with a certain mindset of what had to be done, and then they did it, and at first contact with reality, basically it failed, right? And as a result of this failure of the Labour Party with regard to their popularity at least, you see the rise of the Reform Party. And so the Reform Party is leading in the polls at the moment. They've never been in office before, they've never been in charge, they're a new party basically, and nevertheless they are dominating the polls. So there's just a quick graphic here that shows that effectively nearly all of Labour Party's support will go to Reform. If there was a general election today, that's what would happen, and not only Labour support but a lot of Conservative support as well, that would provide the Reform Party with a majority. In a previous video that I made, when I said that Reform were leading in the polls, apparently this is not common knowledge, because I had a few comments that said, oh, leading in the polls, ha ha ha, as if I was wrong. Well, I'm not wrong. And so I'm just going to show a few different versions of recent polls that show the Reform Party not only leading, but dominating in the polls, and what that would look like if, from an electoral map from the UK, if there was a general election today. So those charts that I've just shown, they basically all agree, and they're from different polls, right? So there is very much a consensus, and it's perfectly aligned with the Labour Party's drop. Okay, so let's get into who the Fabian Society actually are. The Fabian Society is basically, it's a think tank effectively, but it has very close ties to the Labour Party, and so this, I'm just showing like a Wikipedia summary of who they are, The Fabian Society is a British socialist organisation whose purpose is to advance the principles of social democracy and democratic socialism via gradualist and reformist effort in democracies rather than revolutionary overthrow. So they have this idea of gradualism. Will gradually take hold of the power and then will gradually but nicely strangle it so that we can implement our ideology, basically, right? And this is shown by their original logo, which is this. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing, a sneaky, stealthy wolf gradually taking over things whilst appearing to be a sheep. Not ominous at all, right? So, okay, so Kier Starmer's obviously been a member of the Fabian Society for a long time. And here's just a quick view of something he said. This was published in a Fabian Society publication. And it says, well, a few things, but I wanted to point out, he said, "I hope and know that the Fabians will be alongside us again in our mission for a decade of national renewal." This is before the Labour Party took office and then their worldview imploded almost immediately. But a decade of renewal does not look like it's being ushered in. Who else is in the Fabian Society? Well, we'll go through that. We'll go through the cabinet next. But I just want to have a quick honourable mention for Sadiq Khan. Sadiq Khan is a member of the Fabian Society. He is the London mayor. And he says, in this, which was the same publication that Kier Starmer was published in recently, he says, "At this milestone, we recall what binds us as Fabians." Doesn't sound cultish at all, does it? Fabians. Anyway, so I joined the Fabian Society 30 years ago because its values reflected my own. As mayor of those values, those values have been the foundation on which I have governed. Okay, so thanks, Sadiq. Following up, let us make this anniversary one to remember, with City Hall, a host of Whitehall departments, and 10 Downing Street all occupied by Fabians. Yep, so they are very much in control now. And how are things going? Not great, I would say. Okay, so let's look at the cabinet, right? So this shows the current Labour cabinet. These are our esteemed cabinet officials in government in the UK, right? So the Labour cabinet. So let's start from the top, and we're going to say, are these people Fabians or not? So just make a quick estimate as a percentage of the cabinet. How many do you think are members of the Fabian Society up front? Lock in a percentage. What percentage do you think in your mind would you estimate? And I'll give you the percentage at the end. But let's start with Kier Starmer. Is Kier Starmer a Fabian? Yes, of course he's a Fabian. We already established that. What about David Lammy? David Lammy, yep, he's also a Fabian. How about Rachel Reeves? Yep, Rachel Reeves is a Fabian. How about Yvette Cooper? Yep, Yvette Cooper is a Fabian. How about Shabana Mahmood? No, she's not actually, which is probably why she seems to have this different view, different worldview to the rest of the cabinet. And I spoke about that in a recent video that I made about Shabana, and you can find that on my channel. Anyway, let's not go through them all one by one. Let's just skip right to the end. How many are Fabians? This many are Fabians. Quite a lot. That is 77% of the cabinet. So they are very much in control. Okay, so in this process, I went through 500 pages. I read them, I made notes, and I was trying to extract, and stress test my views of them and just see, is my view of what they believe accurate? And ultimately, yeah, and to be honest, I was quite shocked at the severe echo chamber thinking that's going on in the Fabian Society. Reading all these documents, I saw the same things being said by different people published over many years. I went back more than 3 years in these documents, right? So you don't have to. But basically, there's this really severe echo chamber. I'll just give you a quick summary before we go into more detail. There's this severe echo chamber element that's going on. It's like there's not a great diversity of thought whatsoever. And so clearly they have this really serious in-group confirmation bias. It's as if there are all of these truths that shall not be challenged ever. They're just definitely true. So we don't challenge them or consider other opinions or perspectives. We just take that same ideology and apply it in different ways through different people and then select data that confirms. And I'll show good examples of that. So it's not inclusive. It gives this mentality, or you'll see on the left a lot of the time, this headline of we're inclusive, but that's not inclusive at all. That's exclusive. We exclude anyone who doesn't agree with us fundamentally, and we don't engage or consider them. So you think about it from Labour's perspective. They'd spent decades in this in-group out of office, but nevertheless in this Fabian Society, talking to each other back and forth, and there are many journalists who are Fabians. You can imagine maybe at The Guardian, the LSE, the London School of Economics was founded by the Fabians, and a lot of the thinkers come out of the LSE, right? So they're all saying the same thing back and forth to them. So they become convinced that they're so right, especially when conservatives were doing so bad, right? Then they're like, oh, well, we're just definitely right. They're so full of confidence. They come into government and then they immediately fail. First contact with reality, it implodes. And now we've got this government that seems just so disconnected from reality. And what choice do they have? They're such ideologues that basically they have to continue. And yet it's obvious to everybody that nobody agrees with what they're doing. So it's another thing that I found that really stood out was this authoritarianism. And we see that in government, right? So we see that being manifest within the Labour Party, but it's throughout their published documents, the Fabian Society published documents. There's this thread of well, the means justify the ends, and we will, you know what I mean? So, we're so right, and we must be right because we all agree. And that's definitely what's right for society. So if we have to do things from an authoritarian perspective, right, then that's kind of okay, because this is what's right for society, even if they don't know it's right for them. So, and that has this tendency to supersede free expression of thought and liberalism, effectively, right, and individualism. You will be forced into this good worldview, into this good society, whether you like it or not, and whether you all agree with it or not, right? So that's a really dangerous perspective. So yeah, I summarized this myself. I wrote down, while I was reading through these documents, we're so morally right that we will force you to do what we say is the right thing, which is completely kind of upside down, because it's not right to force people to do things they don't want, especially not on a population level. So another thing that really, there's a couple of other things that stood out to me, right? But one I really want to just stress is it assumes that there's no difference between people. It starts from this basis of everybody is the same. Everyone is the same capabilities, just the same. And basically any difference in outcome is the result of oppression and external causation. So any difference in, let's say, achievement between people is simply the result of their environment being harsh to them, or it's not to anything, can never be to do with the fact that that person is different to somebody else. Everyone must be the same always. They're all the same. So that's something that was just a recurring theme. Another thing that really stood out to me, and I will go after this video, I'm going to do a deep dive from an integral theory perspective into Fabianism. But another thing that really stood out to me was that they have this, and I mentioned it before, but they have this bias toward external causation. So just to explain this quick, and I want to just cover a couple of these things before we go into detail, so they're in mind and we can see examples of them. And I've explained what I mean by these concepts as we go through, right? So basically, so conservatives have this bias toward internalizing causation. So they will basically gravitate toward believing that individual accountability, individual responsibility, and behaviors on the individual level is the cause of certain outcomes. So if somebody, suffers, or if they do well or whatever, it's the result of their internal state and actives and behaviors from an internal perspective. It's their responsibility and accountability, right? Then there tends to be this liberal bias, right, which would be the left, typically the Labour Party, which is external causation, right? So it's caused by the environment. It's not them, it's not their behavior. They are victims of their environment, right? So I won't go through too many examples, but I'll just provide one. So if you think about gun laws in the United States, so Republicans will often say that the cause of gun crime is people who shoot other people. It's, they are causing that. It's their behavior as a result of their internal state and their, lack of morality, basically, right? Whereas the Democrats or the liberals are more likely to say, and liberal can mean different things, but anyway, the Democrats on the left are more likely to say, no, it's the environment. There's guns everywhere, and so as a result, you're going to get these crimes. Both are right in their own way, right? So both are important and both are right. And it's when you get extreme in either one of those and exclude the other that you end up with basically like a pathological ideology, because it's not, it doesn't take a wider perspective. An integral perspective balances both of those, but I won't dwell on that for now. But this is an important concept, because what the Fabian Society publications do is they constantly boil everything down into external causation. Everything is the result of externalities. People don't have agency, and they don't have differences among themselves. Everything is the result of the external environment. That's it, right? So now this external bias manifests across society as a victim narrative. So, that victim narrative is say everything is focused on, poor you, right? You've got this suffering, poor you, because it's caused by an unfair world that's doing this on you. And this is an extremely bad ideology overall, when it's not balanced by the internal elements, the internal causation. So another thing I wanted to mention before we go into the papers is this graphic, right? So what this shows is, if you look on the left, you've got that little blue cluster, okay? And then on the right, you've got this big kind of wide open red cluster. And what this shows is the left and the right. So left-wing politics and right-wing politics. And this is distribution of views. Basically, it's like big studies. This is a big study that was produced and distributed by the British Journal of Social Psychology. And what it did was it asked people what their political affiliations were, and then it said, do you disagree, strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, agrees, strongly agree. So it had a range of options on a large number of topics, and then it asked Democrats and Republicans, and in the UK that would be Democrats would be Labour, so that would be this blue cluster here, right, which is very small. And what it showed was that on the left there was much less variation of thought, much more control and echo chamber, people agreeing, people saying the same things, answering in the same way, strongly agree on this, strongly agree on all the same things. So they might I agree on vaccines, I agree on gun control, I agree on abortion, I agree on open borders, I agree on gender ideology, I agree, strongly agree. And they form this real cluster. But then on the right, you've got this much wider array of opinions. So I kind of somewhat agree on vaccines, not really, maybe. This is not me, by the way. But I agree kind of on borders, maybe slightly different for illegal migrants than legal. I kind of agree on this and that. And what that shows is that there is a critical thinking process. It's not just absorbing an echo chamber pattern of thinking. And the reason this is so important as we go through the Fabian Society publications is because the Fabian Society publications and Labour's ideology is the result of this in-group thinking on steroids. Like, it's unbelievable. I went through so much of these documents and I thought, wow, this is really just people repeating stuff to themselves in a closed loop, in an echo chamber, over and over and over again, and convincing themselves that they're completely right. And yeah, unfortunately they're not, and they're missing really important perspectives. So, all right, I'm just going to take a quick break. I've been ranting for a bit, so I'll be back. All right, so just a couple of examples I'm just going to show of this manifesting. Kier Starmer gets into power, and what does he do on illegal migration? He says we're going to smash the gangs. Clearly nonsensical. So he's not thinking about incentives and disincentives for people coming. He's thinking, no, it's external, right? It's an external reality. So we just have to control the external environment, because this is not behavioural. It's, you know, basically not considering the incentives or disincentives. It's all about, we need to find where the dinghies are coming from and, you know, stop them from being supplied and smash these gangs, which is, yeah, not working whatsoever. Of course it was never going to work. And another example of this is what they did with ninja swords. So this is with regard to knife crime in the UK, which is at terrible rates. And their approach is not, why are people doing this? What's their ideology? How can we change that? How can we change the way they think? Who are the people who are responsible? It's because they have access to ninja swords. So what we need to do is get ninja swords out of the environment. Well, hang on a sec. There's a hell of a lot of ninja swords in Japan, and they have very low knife crime. Riddle me that. So, yeah, there are a couple of examples of externalizing causation. Okay, in my next video, I'm going to go much more deep from an integral perspective on the reason for this ideology emerging and what it actually looks like. But essentially, it's like postmodern egalitarianism. So it's postmodernism, but it's an extreme form of postmodernism. So postmodernism, when it came about, was really about egalitarianism, which is kind of a respect for everybody. Everybody's valuable, right? Everybody's equally valuable, which is a good thing. But then, in its extreme form, that same ideology says that everybody not only equally valuable and should be with equal rights and respected with equal opportunities, but they're the same. They're all the same. So that's how that ideology goes from basically healthy, holistic, into pathological. It has a really deep dislike for group-based differences. For example, a person from Afghanistan is the same as a person from the UK. Clearly that's not true in many very important ways. And if you have a mentality that thinks that it is true, then you'll have results that don't align, that you don't expect, basically. So, okay, now we're going to get started on the actual documents now. The first document we're going to have a look at is Lawful and Fair, Building a Better Migration System. Now, this was produced, distributed and published by the Fabian Society prior to Labour taking office. So my argument is that this is what Labour went into office with the mentality of. And just by the way, this is an example. I've read loads of their documents, and I see the same threads, the same concepts coming up repeatedly in many different ways, in many publications, same thing over and over again. But this is just an example, right? So This document was produced by Will Somerville, who I show here, and he holds a master's degree with distinction in social policy from the London School of Economics. Remember, the Fabian Society founded the London School of Economics. And also Sarah Muley, and she's kind of worked in government and writes on these topics. The first thing that really stood out to me was one of the important elements that they said when designing the immigration system was that it required democratic support. They say, our first proposed principle is that decisions about migration policy must be underpinned by democratic consent. I completely agree, and that's been the problem for decades. As I show here, I've got just a quick overview of some polls that date back decades, showing that the British people have never had support at a high level for migration, and that is the problem. So they didn't have democratic support, and let's just keep that in mind as we go through. Okay, then they said, second, the UK is a democracy with a commitment to individual rights under the law. Policies which are themselves unlawful or which would lead to unlawful infringement of individual rights should be ruled out. What they mean by this is basically law exists, and any policy, any migration policy that's illegal must be ruled out immediately. And you can see these two principles in their key principles: democratic consent and rights under the law. The reason I mention rights under the law is because basically what this ties into is the ECHR, which is preventing us from dealing with the illegal migration crisis that we have in the UK at the moment. And what this document basically says is, we can't do anything that's illegal. And because we've got these laws in place and they're really deeply embedded throughout our legal system, then we can't, we're basically limited and we have to do things that are legal. And before we go on, so they say, similarly, we have largely chosen to use the word migrants to refer to all those who are new to the UK, including refugees and asylum seekers. So basically, when they say migrants, they mean legal and illegal. They're putting them both together. Further, social benefit. We recommend that a new government adopt an affirmative goal of citizenship in the migration system, ensuring that as many migrants as possible are supported to integrate on a path to citizenship to enable them to commit and contribute to the UK for the long term and become equal members of our society. So what they're saying there is, we need all migrants, illegal and legal, to become citizens as soon as possible. We propose 3 goals for the next government: international cooperation, social benefit, and economic contribution. These goals are partly about policy that works. For example, there is no way to stop the boats without effective coordination with the EU. Think about that for a sec. So they're saying it's impossible to stop the boats without cooperation from the EU. What? Based on what evidence? So you see, when you come at this from, you must not break the law is sacrosanct and it exists and it's it, right? Then you get to the conclusion of, so therefore within this law we must cooperate with the EU. But where have these systems which countries have actually been able to control illegal migration? Well, Australia, who did it unilaterally, didn't coordinate with other countries and take permission from them to protect their own borders. And America, the United States under Donald Trump, is he begging? No, he's not begging. He's basically saying, we're just doing it. And his only real interactions with other countries are basically putting them in a position where they have to agree to do things for them, right? So you see how from the beginning it's a little bit off. Now, just as we continue through this, keep in mind this is what the Labour Party, this is the mentality the Labour Party had when they went into office, right? When they went into office, when the illegal migration was a massive problem, then this is the mentality they were going in with. These are the policies, basically. And I'll prove that to a certain extent. So Labour were actually elected as a result of the Boris wave, which the Conservatives implemented after Brexit. So And again, I'll go through that. So Labour don't seem to understand, that a massive part of the vote for Labour was people being incredibly unhappy about the fact that the Conservative government just opened up the borders post-Brexit and caused massive migration to come in. Of course, there's more to it, but that was a major element. Okay, international coordination. We recommend a new national refugee policy based on international agreements, including a new partnership with France. Sound familiar? Because that's exactly what they've done. That's exactly what the Labour government have done. So you can see how basically this document, it's like, I think this is basically a step plan, and they started going through the process of implementing it, and yeah, it's gone off the rails. So commitment to the planned resettlement of at least 20,000 refugees a year. Okay, now what this document really does is, and so another element of it, right, is it basically says we need to industrialize illegal migration. So not only do we accept those that are coming now, but we actually create an environment in which we create big offices of staff, and we commit to even more as minimums that we'll bring in. So it's not that we want to control it, it's that we want to enable it more and more. That's what this document shows. It shows they want to bring more and more people in, actually. So an immediate end to the Rwanda plan, again, one of the first things that Labour did when they got in office. So you see the alignment between what Labour did in this document. Okay, so further, they outlined a couple of questions. I'll pick a couple of them. And these are questions that they recommend ministers ask themselves when designing an effective migration policy. The first one is a given policy decision consistent with the spirit and letter of the Refugee Convention and other international law and treaties? Does it further effective bilateral or multilateral cooperation on migration and other issues? So basically, again, it's like, does it align with the legal system and the existing international networks that we've got? Okay, and another question they recommend ministers ask is, does a given policy decision increase the proportion of migrants who are supported on a path to citizenship? Does it decrease the proportion of migrants who are at risk of irregularity or discrimination? So a big priority for them is making migrant citizens and making sure that they're not discriminated against in the law that exists now. So this was what Labour went into government thinking about. All right, this next bit is really important, because fundamentally what this shows is where the schism was created between what the Labour government thought was happening and what was actually happening. So this is why their policies and approach were so wrong. And I can show you, I read the studies and I'll show you exactly what happened. This is basically the key reason why Labour became so unpopular so quickly and why they continue to be. Okay, migration is also seen by the public as less of a priority than in the past, right? They're referring to a bunch of studies, okay? And so what happened was, and I'll just bring up a chart really quick. So in this chart, what it shows is that this is basically a chart that shows salience of immigration. It means how much of a priority do British citizens think immigration is in their voting tendency. So will they vote for a party based on what they'll do with immigration? And so what this shows is, starting in 1994 very low, then it moves up and up and up into a crescendo right around Brexit. Then Brexit happens. And then the public's opinion of how important voting on the basis of migration decreases, and it decreases from 2016 down to 2019, okay? And what these people who've written this document argue is that, well, people don't really mind immigration anymore. They're fine with it now. So it's not a hot topic anymore. And so it's okay for us to continue, basically, right? And so I've shown when the article was written, and that's shown in purple, right? And they even say, yeah, it's kind of gone up a little bit, but, it's low still. And then after that, you see it ramping straight back up again. And that little yellow star that I show is where it's at now. It is at the same levels as when Brexit happened. Okay? So what actually happened here, obviously, and it doesn't take an LSE degree to understand this. In fact, it seems like an LSE degree will prevent you from understanding this. But what actually happened was people went through a huge kind of dramatic event within politics where they went against the establishment and they voted for Brexit and they got it and they thought, okay, good, we finally dealt with that issue. They've finally listened to us over decades. We've been saying the same thing. They finally listened to us on immigration, and we will now see that controlled. So we don't need to vote on the basis of it anymore. It's not an important issue. It's a solved issue. Because clearly we're gonna get migration down. Then Boris Johnson opens the floodgates, right, to never seen before levels, and then you get, and I'll just show that now. So in this chart you can see massive spike, and then people go, oh my God, I thought this was solved through Brexit, and then immediately the sentiment around the importance of immigration starts rising, and then I'll show it here in a chart. So basically this is from August 2025. It shows that immigration is the leading topic again. And the reason for that is because, well, clearly the opposite of what the public wanted was done again at even higher levels. So, and Labour had convinced themselves going into office that that was just fine based on a flawed interpretation of this data and these studies. So the last chart that I showed was, in fact, a couple of them, the salience chart and then another one, was from this Ipsos Mori tracker, and that's what's referenced in this Fabian Society publication. So this is directly the data they were looking at, right? So I went and found those specific studies and I looked at what actually happened. And yeah, so basically what they also said was the UK public's views on migration, which are in part underpinned by people's long-held values and partly by the particular conditions in which migration takes place, are similarly dynamic and have changed substantially and positively in the last decade. They have changed because people thought it was a solved issue. That's why it improved. Things were healing, but no. They thought, no, now that it's out of the public's mind and they're not furious about it anymore, we can just do it again. Just unbelievable. So, and here I'm just going to show this view, right? So if you look at this view, this shows people's views about migration from the Ipsos Mori data. You see that, right, in 2015, before Brexit, if you look over on the left, positive, and this says like, what's the proportion of people who think that migration has had a positive overall effect? This is really sad, actually, okay, because before Brexit, people had an overall negative view of migration. They thought it didn't have a positive effect on the UK. But then we had Brexit and it shot up, and then things were healing. People were thinking, okay, yeah, actually it's had a positive view. It's not a very dramatic issue anymore. It's a solved issue. We've done Brexit. Everything will get better now. And then that maintained, and people started to realise what happened with the Boris wave. And now it's plummeting again. Negativity is rising, and Labour Party just still don't get it. And they've misinterpreted all this data. And then lastly, I'm just going to show this next chart to show where we've actually ended up. Unnecessarily, but this is where we're at. 45% of Britons say that they would support an immigration scenario whereby no more new migrants were admitted and large numbers of recent migrants were required to leave. But what do you mean by that? So basically what this says is, yeah, people are even further and think even more strongly in opposition to migration overall, which is such a shame. That never had to happen. So I hope I've created a clear picture of what happened there. Okay, so I'm going to go through a series of other elements of this Fabian Society publication, just to give a sense of where it was heading, what their ideology, what the Labour Party's ideology very likely was. Now, they implemented a few of the things that were recommended in this document already immediately. They got rid of the Rwanda plan, they got rid of the Illegal Migration Act 2023, they created a deal with France, and also this Smash the Gangs thing was mentioned in there as well. So they were moving through this. This was their direction of travel, right? Refugees bring talent, skills, and agency that strengthen our communities and economies. It said that. So what this is talking about is the creation of a new department, basically, that's just to process asylum claims. So they want to ramp it up and create an industry out of it. Okay. So they want to commit to minimum numbers of people coming in, plus bring more in and do various other things and make them citizens as quickly as possible. This is what this document says, okay? Now think about through this, is this aligned with the general public's view when Labour came in? Is this what they said in their manifesto? Did you ever hear Kier Starmer saying any of this stuff? So this would be a new humanitarian, non-departmental public body or separate public agency, a UK refugee service with at least 1,000 trained and senior refugee and asylum decision-making staff with clear career paths, including potential to work with international organisations, creating an industry out of approving asylum claims and bringing people in on a continual basis so they can develop their career and create an industry out of it. The new agency would be judged on the efficient and accurate decision making, including priori decisions to accept claims from certain countries, right? So basically, certain countries, Afghanistan, Syria, etc., that have high approval rates, they would just do a blanket approval. Anyone is prior approved, basically. Effective management of planned arrivals and an immediate focus on clearing the backlog via a new refugee fast track to quickly approve those with prima facie claims, right? So basically approve, which is what Labour Party was starting to do. Approve, move into the community, out of hotels, into HMOs, into social housing. Let's build loads of social housing, build an industry out of this, get more and more people in, make them citizens as quickly as possible, and then maybe they'll vote for us, right? Second, the UK should offer protection to refugees through a wider range of routes. This would include a commitment to 20,000 planned refugee arrivals per year. The UK Refugee Service, that I just mentioned, would be responsible for resettling 20,000 refugees per year referred by the UNHCR or a vetted referral partner, with a minimum number of people accepted by all local authorities in the UK, meaning all local authorities would have to accept a minimum number of asylum seekers. Again, what they wanted to do was to industrialise this. The UK Refugee Service would be responsible for administering a single uncapped additional sponsorship route. This community welcome route would allow citizen groups. Basically, what that means is you can have citizen groups, you could have sponsorship for refugees. So basically just trying to get more in, get them sponsored. Citizens groups could do this. So it's basically uncapped, unlimited, any number. Crazy. It's crazy because this is just so different to where the general public were. This is completely the opposite. And this only happens when you're in an echo chamber and you're not listening and you're saying the same thing over and over again to each other on repeat, right? Faith, charity and community groups as well as universities. This community welcome route would allow citizen groups, including faith, charity and community groups, as well as universities and employers, to sponsor refugees, building on existing schemes, including the community sponsorship scheme for the Homes for Refugee scheme, but not restricted to any particular nationality. I mean, this is just putting it on steroids. This is like, it's uncapped, sponsored, anyone can do it, and just bring as many as possible, and we're going to have this whole department just to churn through and approve. This is the exact opposite of where the general public were. It is absolutely crazy to me that these people who have apparently careers working on this and degrees in this area think that this was appropriate. The only way you end up in that position if you're just speaking to the same people over and over again. Finally, a clear refugee integration package, including the right to work during the assessment of claims. A path to citizens for all refugees and well-resourced and valued partnerships with local government, including mandated acceptance of some refugees. So yeah, you can work while you're claiming asylum, and we'll get as many as we can, sponsor you, and we're going to mandate acceptance, and we're going to distribute to all local authorities that will have a minimum cap. Under the second major policy goal, social benefit, which seeks to create a shared common future for the UK, we propose two key reforms: place citizenship at the heart of the immigration system, a community-based welcome strategy, meaning the communities must welcome people, and migrants of all sorts must be made citizens as soon as possible. Now, these are the exact opposite things than what Reform's doing, and Reform is, as I showed before, seriously leading in the polls. So you see why. First, establishing the acquisition of citizenship as a positive guiding principle. The whole migration system, i.e. ensuring that as many migrants as possible are supported to integrate on a path to citizenship. Okay, I'll go through a few more just really quick. Another obvious reform to actively encourage naturalisation would be to make accelerated citizenship offer to all those who have settled status. Anyone with ILR, anyone with settled status immediately made citizens, the exact opposite of what Reform have just said and are leading in the polls as a result of. How are the people writing this so disconnected? For example, the Home Office could move all status and status adjustment decisions forward towards a 5-year route to settlement and citizenship by default. Reduce application fees on the route to citizenship to cover costs only, and make applications free for children. Remove all no resource to public funds conditions on such routes. So basically make it free or make it really cheap to make these people citizens, as many of them as we possibly can. A focus on welcoming and belonging means widening the geography and welcoming and taking a systemic approach to harnessing the appetite of the wider public to get involved in supporting the inclusion of refugee and migrant families. Okay, next. Recent Fabian Society pamphlet, and also reversing changes that undermine citizenship for dual nationals. Current citizenship deprivation powers include the power to strip citizenship without giving notice and have already been used for offences unrelated to terrorism. For example, those convicted in grooming gang cases. So what this is saying is we need to stop people from being able to strip citizenship from people such as those convicted of crimes in the grooming gang scandal. Does that sound aligned with what the general public wanted? That we would not be able to strip citizenship of those who committed crimes within the grooming gang scandal? Seems completely the opposite. A community-based welcome strategy would fit and move a lot in lockstep with a new national refugee policy, for example, requiring a minimum level of refugee resettlement in all local authorities with a single community welcome sponsorship scheme for all nationalities as outlined above, but encompassing all new arrivals. A new immigration rule offering the right to work for any asylum seeker in the UK after 6 months from date of application. A new immigration rule to offer settlement after 5 years in the UK on any visa, with a fee waiver for ILR applications. The immediate implementation of a new online portal that simplifies the improvement and improves the paper-based questionnaire sent to asylum applicants from Afghanistan, Eritrea, Libya, Syria and Yemen in early 2023. For any nationality with high acceptance rates and waiting more than 50 days for a decision. What this means is let's make it easier for them. For people from Afghanistan, Eritrea, Syria and Libya and the Yemen, etc. Let's make it easier so they don't have to go through all these papers and stuff. Let's put it online and make it easier, make it pre-approved and make them citizens. That's what they wanted to do. That was their mentality going into office, okay? So just to summarize, right? So what this policy document says, it requires democratic support, right? But democratic support has never existed. They don't have democratic support for this. They clearly don't. If they looked at data properly, they would know that they didn't. Makes mistakes, mistakes temporary improvement in views on immigration post-Brexit as a sign that people are now okay with more mass migration. I explained that previously. Argues for a deal with France and abolishing the Rwanda scheme, things that they did. Argues for making all migrants British citizens as soon as possible, wants illegal migrants to be able to work whilst cases are pending, wants to build an industry out of illegal migration with 1,000 permanent staff with career trajectories, wants to commit to a minimum of 20,000 refugees per year, it's a minimum number, convert all with ILR into British citizens, prevent the removal of citizenship for dual nationals convicted of crimes, including those involved in the grooming gangs. So this in itself is so far away from where the general public's consensus is. And the reason this is so harmful is because we clearly after Brexit, we were starting to heal on this whole topic and come together, right? And now it's just reignited, and it's just such a shame, basically. It was unnecessary, and it's because of echo chamber thinking in the Fabian Society and the Labour Party that this has happened. All right, so that's one publication done. Now we're going to look at another one, which is Power and Prosperity. Let me start by saying I quite like this document, as much as you can like reading any document like this. I thought it was actually relatively balanced. But nevertheless, there were some things in here that really showed the same kind of bias, and I thought I would just point out some bits to show that, you know, it's not just one document that has that bias. Okay, so it says, in reality, equality of opportunity, which is about freedom, and equality of outcome are two sides of the same coin. I completely disagree. They are not two sides of the same coin whatsoever. Actually, what happens in practice is equality of opportunity. You can, you know, it's based on meritocracy. Everyone should have equal rights to apply to things, to manifest, you know, their skills. And equality of outcome is based on discrimination. You have to discriminate against people in order to get an outcome that is predetermined based on ideology, which is what they do. So next, the UK has the second highest disease burden among the G7 countries, with a high prevalence of obesity, although it performs better on smoking cessation. Meanwhile, the number of working age adults reporting mental health conditions has risen by 530,000 since the COVID-19 pandemic. This was just something that I picked out because through this document, again, they didn't really focus on internal causation. It was all external causation. And on that topic of obesity, they go on to say, taxing consumption of processed sugar and harmful foods. We know that the West is confronting an obesity crisis. Diet and physical inactivity contribute to 47% of diseases alongside 60% of deaths globally. There's been a significant growth of childhood obesity over the last 30 years. And the thing about this is, so this taxation of sugar, so processed sugar and harmful foods, is again trying to control the external environment instead of look at the internal causation for obesity, which is clearly ineffective, and it's just a demonstration again of the same wrong thing, basically, in my mind. Of course, internal and external causation exists, but there's just this constant gravitation toward external causation within these documents. And next, we propose a reformed social insurance system with hypothecated funding for the NHS collected through a dedicated levy. According to the Institute of Fiscal Studies, a rise of 1.25% in employee national insurance contributions and employer wage costs could generate an additional £14 billion per annum for the NHS. This is so important, right? Because that's what they did. They basically increased national insurance for employers. And then what happened was vacancies dropped hugely. In the UK, based on HMRC payroll data, private industry roles dropped by 230,000. So overall payroll in the UK is 150,000 down, but public sector payrolls 75,000 up. And so it's just not working. But what this shows is that this is the mentality. These documents form the mentality that the Labour Party have taken into office and are implementing, and it's failing. On migration, in this document, it says migration and national identity. To attain a good society, Labour must be willing to address issues with voters that many consider contentious, including the impact of migration. Immigration is unfortunately still a toxic and divisive issue in the UK. Why is it toxic? Why is it divisive? Because the government, for generation at least, multiple generations maybe, has not done what the public have wanted. That's why. Obviously, migration is necessary to address labour market shortages, but leads inevitably to concerns about numbers. The rate of immigration into the UK has more than doubled in the last 30 years. This, again, it basically is based on this mentality that the only way to deal with our falling fertility rates is through migration. We must import ever-increasing numbers of people to support an aging population. It doesn't consider that maybe there's alternate approaches. Maybe we should be encouraging women to have more children and men to support, or we can do things to really properly financially support that. It's basically, just preconceived notions, confirmation bias, and then outcomes that aren't aligned with what voters want. The ethics of belonging, shared identity, and national community need to be actively sustained and cherished by the state. I completely agree. We really need to have this sense of national belonging, and I spoke about this in my video on Raise the Colours and Ethnocentricity. It's so important that we have a nation-state sense of belonging. The problem here is that that's not what Kier Starmer is doing. That's not what the Labour Party are doing. They are divisive, and so is Sadiq Khan, because they label entire groups of people, the majority of the country, who don't think exactly like them, who aren't in this echo chamber. They call them all far right. They call them all wrong, right? And you can see, as I showed before, and I'll bring it up again quick, that the kind of coalescence of thought within these echo chambers is very small, and then there's a wide array of individuals who have disparate opinions that the left turns around and goes, that's all far right. And that's extremely divisive. It doesn't create a cohesive community across the country. It's not inclusive, it's exclusive. It's an exclusive echo chamber ideology. And in this same document, just to prove that point, it says the wave of far-right violence that swept the country in the wake of a number of the murder of 3 young children in Southport during summer 2024 was an example of the divisions pervading society. But you see, you're being divisive in your very statement. You can't say that all people who are out, demonstrating their frustration were all far right. That's divisive. That doesn't create a sense of community belonging. Community is not just everyone who completely agrees with your echo chamber thinking. Dear me. That was a very deep dive into Fabian Society ideology, and by extension the Labour Party's ideology. So I think I showed with quite a lot of evidence how there is this echo chamber thinking that basically has certain characteristics to it that has caused this complete disconnect between where society is and where the government is. And I think the Fabian Society is really a great example of that kind of echo chamber. And what we clearly need to do as a society is to reach across these boundaries and gain perspective. So a lot of what I've done in this video is talk about, different views, how this information can be interpreted in different ways. And it's not to say that one way is 100% right or 100% wrong. The issue really is that when you have societies like this, or think tanks and groups of people who all have the same view, they're not challenged, and then they have a very narrow perspective, and then that fails and harms society as a result. So yeah, I think effectively we can see quite clearly that the Labour Party overall, with so many of the cabinet members being Fabian Society members, they really have been in an echo chamber very much. And that's been harmful for society. So yeah, I just would encourage them, I'd encourage anyone, just try to think about these other perspectives, engage across the board, a wider sort of array of people to get different viewpoints and actually create an inclusive way of thinking. So, okay, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you managed to get all the way through that, I know it was a deep dive, but I hope it gave you a flavour of Fabian Society ideology. And trust me, this scratches the surface of what I've actually gone into. So, yeah, thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video. I really appreciate it. Okay, cheers.